All right, hello and welcome to today's Open Architecture Collaborative webinar about open data. What is it and how might you be able to use it? My name is Garrett Jacobs. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Architecture Collaborative and very excited to be joined here by Ashley Han and Jason Lally. They'll give a little bit more of a background. Hello and welcome to today's Open Architecture Collaborative webinar about open data. What is it and how? Sorry about that. So again, just wanted to have this conversation to represent the opportunities and the resources that you have in your cities that are already being produced to help you accomplish your work as community designers and being more proactive in understanding the landscape of needs in your city. So again, talking to the architects, planners, and interior designers, landscape architects that make up the Open Architecture Collaborative. And so with that, I want to introduce our kind of experts today. First, we have Jason Lally, who is currently San Francisco's Open Data Program Manager. He works with the city's Chief Open Data Officer, Joy Bonaguro, to help kind of operationalize the city's data strategy, so all the information coming out of all the city departments. He comes to the city by way of the Mayor's Innovation Fellowship, and before that he worked at the intersection of tech and urban planning as the director of Decision Lab at Place Matters in Denver. He came to open government and open data through the work in cities and regions across the country on data-informed community planning processes, recognizing the need for more robust information services and platforms to support strong community engagement. Jason's pleased to contribute to making data more accessible and useful at the city, and he earned his master's in city and regional planning from University of Pennsylvania. And then we have Ashley Han, who has more letters after her name, than I can even try to pronounce. So it's very, very we're honored to have her with us. And she's currently the transportation technology strategist for the city of LA in the DOT under Mayor Eric Garcetti. She'll talk a little bit more about the details of that post. And previously, she served as Mayor Sly James's first Chief Information Officer for the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and was the first female municipal CIO in the country. Kind of working across departments, she focused on improving process improvement through strategic planning, staff involvement, and use of lean methodology and design thinking. And then, was responsible for many public-private partnerships on bringing tech and innovation to the city. Before that, she was an architectural designer for AECOM and worked with public and private sector clients across the country. She holds a BA in political science from McGill and a master's in architecture from Pratt Institute, and is a registered architect in the state of Missouri. We're very honored to have her with us, and Jason as well, and it's very exciting to see folks that have a background in architecture and planning and moving into municipal government and really trying to make it work for the people and make information and processes more accessible to really do the meaningful work in improving our cities and making them more accessible, equitable places. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Jason, who's going to give us a little bit of background of kind of what open data is, how it's produced, and how it's accessible right now.
Thank you, Garrett. So I'm going to share my screen here and get a quick presentation going. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Great. As Garrett mentioned, I have a background in urban planning. I'll talk a little bit quickly about my previous work, which was at the nonprofit based in Denver called Place Matters. As the director of the Decision Lab there. One of the things that the organization was really interested in, and I was really interested in, was how people use data and information in decision making, particularly community decision making. So how does one actually imagine a better future for the built environment, for the planned environment, for the social environment. What does that mean? And it's really it was really challenging. You often had to bring a lot of data together to help bring people to basic understanding, and then when you wanted to sort of wrap up that project and give that back to, say, a city or a group that was then going to go on and implement, it was hard for them to actually take that information and then incorporate it into their ongoing and future decision-making processes. So one of the reasons I was excited to land in the city of San Francisco was that it was the ability to kind of switch gears and really focus on capacity building, because that was one of our sort of missions at Place Matters, and it was something that was very hard to do, and for all sorts of reasons, not because people didn't want to have the capacity built, but folks are busy and there's lots going on, and maintaining and building a city is a big job. And so my goal in my role is to really help empower use of data in all means, and actually that is the mission of Data SF. Data SF is the city's open data program, City and County of San Francisco. And today I'll talk a little bit more broadly. I'm not going to go into the whole history. If you're really interested about our program in particular, there's a lot on the web at datasf.org. We have a blog, we have a bunch of resources. I suggest if you're interested in this in general, feel free to check that out. But I'm going to start today really talking about three different unanticipated uses of open data. And hopefully that will just illustrate sort of an endpoint, places that people get with open data, and then I'll work backwards from there and talk about how you can access it and what we're doing as a city to make it more accessible. So the first example is this blog post was done back in last year, 2015. This is Lance Martin, and he notes that he recently grabbed all the crime data on SF, crime data posted to the Open Data Portal. Has about 1.7 million records, and he wanted something to dig into, and this was his opportunity to do some analysis and really look into it. So he looked at the geography of drug crimes in San Francisco, and at the end of the blog post, he invites people to actually look at his methodologies, and there's a little link in here that I'm not going to go to, but basically it's a little notebook that actually shows how he accessed and processed the data and produced a set of charts and graphs and analyses. What was really cool about that is we didn't ask him to do that. The city didn't ask Lance to go and do this analysis. He did this on his own, and found some really interesting sort of trends around how drug crimes have changed over time, how they've shifted a little bit geographically. If you're interested in that more, you can go to that link. I won't do justice to his findings. But this second one, a little less technical. This is an example from a software company, a web-based software company called Mapbox. They build a platform for mapping on the web. Basically, Lizzie Diamond, who is an educator at Mapbox, took one of their software libraries, their sort of web-based libraries for mapping called TURF, and then she took data from the portal and mapped it using that library. This data in particular is our 311 data. 311, for those of you who don't know, is essentially a single number. A number of cities have this. You can call and essentially get customer service. So you can file a complaint. You can get information about events. You can call and ask all sorts of questions, report all sorts of things. You can also access this through a web app as well, so you can take a picture of graffiti and post that. So what you're seeing here is just a simple choropleth map of neighborhoods and the counts of 311 cases in those neighborhoods. So that was really cool. Again, nothing that we asked her to do. She just took San Francisco's data and made it real using this application, or this essentially software library. And then the final one that's really fun and I like a lot is if you haven't had a chance to see Big Hero 6 by Walt Disney Animation Studios, it's a fun movie. And one thing that we didn't know until this article by Gizmodo came out was that the very highly stylized setting of San Francisco, which was a mashup of San Francisco and Tokyo, is actually modeled with base layers from the Open Data portal. So animators actually went and grabbed data from the city of San Francisco's Open Data catalog, downloaded those, and essentially modeled the streets and the buildings based on that. And so one of the fun things that this article describes later is that every location that shows up in the film is an actual place in San Francisco. It looks different because it's stylized differently, but it is actually a location in the city that was modeled from that data. So that's pretty cool. So these three examples are not necessarily things specific to architecture or design, but I wanted to start with at least a little bit of an overview of ways people are using open data out in the world. There are many, many, many more examples on data that we don't publish, on data published by Chicago or New York, but I hope that gives you just a little bit of an idea of how folks are imagining ways of using open data in different ways. And so, what is open data? Well, a very technical definition is that it satisfies two aspects. One, that it's technically open, and two, that it's legally open. So open data is open because, one, you can get it in machine-readable standard formats. And what that means is they're sort of non-proprietary formats like comma-separated values, a CSV file. You can open that in Excel. You can open that in open source alternatives. You don't need a specific type of software to open that file format. And that's important because that enables sort of this liquid use of data. You don't need to have a particular tool. It really opens up the ability to use data in different ways. And then it's legally open, and this is important. So technically open allows you to functionally do something with the data and do it in an easy and accessible way. Legally open, make sure that you don't have to worry about what you're doing with the data is wrong. And so it's very important, particularly for something to be truly open, that it's explicitly licensed to allow commercial and non-commercial use without restriction. Different cities still are catching up. Some folks aren't explicitly licensing. They'll have open data portals, but they won't have a license. And so something to sort of be aware of and look out for, but more and more cities are selecting a very specific license and saying, this is how we license our data. In our case, the City and County of San Francisco, we explicitly license our data going forward under the public domain dedication and license. And all that does is it says, this is yours to use. We give it to you without warranty or liability, but you don't have to attribute us. You don't have to do any of those things. Of course, it's always good to attribute your sources if you're using it in research, but it's not going to be a requirement. So that's sort of the technical and legal definition of open data. But what does that mean for you? So assuming that we've satisfied this, and in San Francisco, I'm hoping we have, really, open data is accessed by you and by anyone really through these open data portals. What you're looking at here is City and County San Francisco's portal at data.sfgov.org. I'm not going to show you all the various portals, but they all pretty much have a similar approach. They might look different, but they're going to have, search. They're going to generally have categories that generally fall around. They're probably going to have different categories, but they're going to fall around similar themes like culture and recreation and housing and buildings, health and social services, those kinds of things. And then, of course, they're going to have, sort of an actual catalog, a list of various data sets. And what you can see here is you can filter that list. You can, further refine that list. And then, of course, the data itself. There's different ways that the data shows up on different portals. In our case, you can get at it through this sort of tabular view where you have rows and columns, and you can download that. So if you go to the export tab, in our case, there's a little download area, and you can download as. You'll see CSV up at the top there. I just mentioned that that's machine readable, JSON, and there's a couple of other formats down below that are less popular, but it's available. And in other cases, folks may post data, so they may not have this tabular view, but they might just have a direct download to a CSV file or some other readable format, machine readable format. So they might look a little different, but generally they're going to give you the same kinds of access. You're going to be able to find, search, find, and get. These generally for architects and designers. I wanted to break this out into sort of three broad strokes of data that I think are going to be most relevant for you in your work. And these really are so broad that they cover most of what cities are publishing. But there's a lot of other data out there that may not be as relevant. But basically, comes down to the natural environment, parks, trees, trails, all those sorts of things. The built environment, which I can talk about in more detail a little bit later if there are questions on this. But where are the buildings? Where are the parcels? What's the land use and the zoning? What's the stuff that describes the way that the built environment looks and feels? And then, of course, the social environment, demographics. Looking at aspects of poverty and usage of social safety net, all those sorts of information that really gets down to understanding the way a community exists, not just in terms of buildings, but in terms of the dynamics of the social environment. And that's sort of that layer, in a sense, is hidden from view in a lot of cases, and this is the part where I think there's a lot of opportunity with data in particular. Is visualizing the built environment is cool, it's interesting, but how do we then understand how the social environment lays over top of that? What does crime look like? What does that mean for the built environment, and vice versa? And so I'll give an example of where we're trying to kind of play with that intersection a little bit at the city, just so you can kind of understand this by example. And when Joy Bonaguro, who's our city's chief data officer, came to the city, one of the things she wanted to know was, what does the city do about affordable housing? And if you are in San Francisco, or if you follow the news, even the national news, this is a huge issue. And it's not just an issue here in San Francisco, it's an increasing issue in a number of other metropolitan areas, but particularly here. And so the other question is, where do you go for reliable data about affordable housing? So these two questions ended up being, the answers to these questions ended up being the problem. Basically, what and where, everyone said, well, I'm not sure. Well, you can go to this this thing over here, and you can get data here. So this was a sort of a key problem that we wanted to try to dig into when we first started with the city's open data strategy. And the result of that was something called the Housing Data Hub. And the idea was it was a single place to get a housing overview. So what, again, answering that question of what does the city do, a description of those policies and programs, and then the supporting data and visualizations that illustrate what the city is doing. And the goal was to be is really kind of create a place that describes that, is somewhat neutral, in the sense that it's really, here's the administrative data, this is what the city's doing. And so we worked a lot with our local chapter of sort of civic hackers, folks who work with data and build applications and websites, to actually build this out and think through the content and all those sorts of things. So it basically looks like, you know, a website, but what we've done is we've kind of pulled all the disparate programs into a single place. So you can dig into affordable housing financing. What do we do around that? What is inclusionary housing? What is public housing? There's often confusion in the public and even within the city about how those programs are different, but how they serve similar goals. And this is all available at housing.datasf.org. And one thing I'm going to point out on the site is we have these visuals. These are actually pulled directly from the portal. And here's one, for example, we have a whole section on rent control. So we're actually showing eviction notices by year since 1997. Obviously, we're in 2016. This is an older screen grab, but one thing you can do is you can actually go to the site and click Get to the Source Data Set, and you're back in that portal where you can go and download and look at the data. So one of the things we wanted to accomplish with this was not just giving people context, but really creating enduring sources of truth and sort of unbroken data lineages, right? You often will go to a PDF or a report or a website and not know where that data is coming from. So we wanted to make sure that that was traceable. And so we're trying to, you know, make sure that that gets layered into a lot of our ongoing and future work as well. And so the reason I highlight this example is that this is really, you know, there's two things going on here. There's the programs and policies. There's also, you'll notice at the top, there's this housing overview. So we're actually looking at housing stock and occupancy, renters versus owners, affordability. So these are census demographic or census data. So this is really about the social environment. And then there's things in here about where are the affordable housing units, so the physical environment, the built environment, and understanding those two ends up being really important to making informed decisions about affordable housing in San Francisco. I'm going to quickly shoot over. I want to wrap up here, but I'm going to shoot over to some examples. So really quickly, here is the portal in live view. One thing I can show you real quick is one thing that people like to do is get land use data. And so the city publishes a set of land use data. It's not all that pretty in the portal, but the data is all there. You can export it. And one thing I did really quick last night is I just pulled this into CartoDB. So I downloaded it, uploaded it, and what's cool is all that data is now in here, and I can kind of play with you know, different visualization settings. So immediately I'm able to get in here and start, you know, visualizing the land use data. But if you know how to use CartoDB or whatever tool you're using, you can start doing analysis on that. So, and I did that in a matter of about 5 minutes. I didn't want to do that live. It's still long for a web presentation that was actually pretty quick to get from data to some version of an analysis or a visualization at least. And then the Housing Data Hub, really quickly, just to see this live. So, you know, I'll go back to that eviction notices by year. You'll notice now this is updated with the most recent data, 2016. This is pulling live from the Open Data Portal, so it's actually grabbing all that data and then visualizing it. And then from the census, you know, here are the renter-occupied units, owner-occupied units. No surprise, are just the inverse of that. But you can get a sense of where there's heavy ownership and heavy renters in the city. One other resource, I have a link to this, but there's actually a website that folks are sort of crowdsourcing awesome public data sets. Includes links to other city portals. It's a lot of information, but it's pretty cool if you're really just interested in kind of digging in. And this is a really great sort of curated resource where folks are just kind of pulling together different public data. So it's not just government data, but any data that's sort of out in the public. And then another resource that I highly recommend, particularly if you want to do really quick understanding of a neighborhood. So datausa.io, you can, and it basically is grabbing all of the various public data available and giving you visuals and context. I won't go into this in detail, but this is a really great way to just quickly get into data, and all the data sources are things like census or city or state data, so you can actually get to the original data as well. So this is a really great resource if you want to do like a first look at a community or an area. And then finally, data.gov, you know, if you want to start from the top down and really look at data.gov kind of it takes all these federated catalogs across different federal departments as well as cities and localities. So I believe our catalog is even searchable through here, and it gives you, you know, searching over 182,000 data sets. So it's a little bit of drinking from the fire hose, but you know, I want to make sure that you all know different places you can go. And with that, I'll wrap up. One thing I'll just say is, before closing, is that one of the reasons that I really do this work is that I'm very excited about where data and data use intersects with community engagement, particularly drawing from my work at Place Matters. So as you know, as we get more data out there, you know, seeing folks being able to actually engage in you know, in events or in community. Here you see a picture of Grace Clark teaching New Orleans Police Superintendent Michael Harrison how to write his first line of code. You know, this is in our city. Grabbed this from a White House blog, but I think that's the kind of engagement that's really interesting when you have folks gathering around and looking at whether it's code or data or an interesting analysis and coming to conclusions together, right? We're walking through those issues together rather than in sort of separate silos and enclaves. So that's all I'll say about that, and I'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. There were a lot of new terms in kind of your presentation, and I just want to let everyone know that we will be following up with a post with some more links to a lot of the information that you threw out there, like CartoDB, and what are some of those tools that you can use to help visualize this. And just overall, it was great to see that you and Joy are working so hard to kind of educate everyone in the city of what kind of some of the main issues are, and using the information that the city is already producing to do so, and just making it more accessible. And I think those tools are really they're available to everyone, like you showed in the first few examples. And so it would be great to see more architects and designers using this as kind of cases for why they're doing the work that we're doing, especially in the community spheres. It can really help you identify kind of how to start doing the work to actually make meaningful impact, and use the information as a validator for why you're doing it and why you're focusing in the certain areas that you are. I think that's something that we can get to be much more robust in doing. So with that, I just want to remind people again that if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the little form below it, and I'll curate them throughout the last 15 minutes or so. But I want to punt it over to Ashley and let Ashley talk about some of the more deeper engagement opportunities that she's done within municipal government, as well as some of the other tools that are built on top of open data that you can use, so you don't necessarily always have to be using just the raw data itself. So with that, go ahead, Ashley.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So I think Jason set us up really well, kind of talking about, sorry, we've got a functional here out there, talking about open data in general, and I think what I'll go into is kind of some of the ways that it can become applicable to the design process itself. And I think one of the challenges is that data is data, and it can be very difficult to figure out kind of whether or not you're working with the right types of data, if you're asking the right questions of the data. And I think the first kind of core principle that I would emphasize is that variety is really necessary. So there are tons of open sources that are available to you, and as Jason illustrated quite successfully, I think, both at the municipal level, but at the state, county, and federal level as well. But I think it becomes very challenging to kind of necessarily understand how that data is useful to your process. And I think there are some really good tools that are out there to help pull that data in, make it easier to visualize, but also help you pose the right type of questions. And I think that's something I'll get to in a little bit as well. But I think if you think about the design process itself, we make a lot of decisions very early on that have a very significant impact on the overall project. So design decisions that are made at the beginning can kind of define what type of resources are required and how the project will go very quickly. And so I think it's important to think about your assessment phase, and as you're planning and thinking about programming of a project, that certainly pulling in that data early will help you get a clearer picture of and understanding the impact. And when we think about buildings, we know that they're a big problem. We know that there's a lot of work to be done in our built environment because the consumption and emissions of this sector is quite significant. And for us to make any major changes to not only the quality of life in our cities, but also to improve environmental outcomes, we need to kind of factor this information in very early into the process. This is an example of what Arup did in the city of Oakland, where they took a look at two different parts of the city and how you might try to pull them together, and using things like mobile surveys and traffic flow reports, they wanted to figure out how to better stitch together, two neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, pardon me. This is the north side and the Oakland neighborhoods. And basically what they did was, as a result of this analysis, they were able to identify better what tools for wayfinding, how you might leverage public artwork and open spaces, and create more interactive kind of components like real-time public transportation and weather information and pay-by-phone bike sharing. So this was really trying to be sensitive to the two very distinct neighborhoods in Pittsburgh and how they may be stitched together more seamlessly by understanding kind of the unique nature of the data behind those neighborhoods, defining those neighborhoods, but also as a way to kind of create commonality. Another kind of key principle is about giving data some context. So, you can look at quantitative data or qualitative data. You can bundle it together in a study. You can you really need to kind of look at the numbers and then start to tell a real story. And the context becomes very essential to that. Land use is a great example. This is a tool called My Sidewalk, where they asked a question about how many residents near a particular park have a disability or special needs in the city of Ashburn, and that's in Virginia. And what this map starts to show you is the total population per capita living with some disability. The places that are darker are the homes for a larger number of residents living with disability, and the green are outlining the different parks and trails that are in this community. So you kind of have all this information up here. And so it's evident from this data that some people with disability, there's a more pronounced population living with disabilities in particular areas, and this dark area here kind of shows where there's about 15% of residents living with a disability, and then actually it is right along a park that does offer an ADA accessible multipurpose trail. So that's really good news. But it doesn't show kind of just where they are, but we also want to know what type of disabilities people are living with. And so these charts then start to kind of break that information down a little bit more specificity. And so I think, thinking about how that starts to translate into how you might redefine not only services, but design of a built environment to accommodate the community that is very locally around all of these public assets, you might start to see a difference in your approach. And so, but then, you can look even further into the data and pull in other types of data. So for example, this is looking at how people commute in Ashburn, Virginia, and what the potential opportunity might be to leverage green infrastructure like bikeways and trails to help accommodate how people are actively getting to their work. And so I think really the critical challenge becomes, how do we take all of this data and turn it into true insights? Another kind of hard example that is underway in the city of Paris is they're looking at repurposing and reshifting the balance of public open space in 7 of their major plazas across the city. And the idea was that if they wanted to really understand how people were using this. So this was a combination of kind of the open data, static data that we know that are available through kind of snapshots of time that are available through open data portals and these various resources that we've illustrated for you. And then it's also been layered on with smart city sensors, which allow for kind of real-time data to look at space utilization. So the city of Paris partnered with a tech company who provided some sensors to monitor the number of people that were biking and walking and driving through these squares, and or these plazas, I should say, and certainly start to understand how people were using them. And then they overlaid it with an engagement tool using the ability to capture opinions from people through little kiosks that were placed in these various plazas to enable people to provide input as to how they may use it. So there's multiple layers of data collection that are occurring, whether it's kind of looking at what's out there already and how can we understand and assess that information, but then combining it with active data collection opportunities, which I think is something that more and more cities are engaged with. And I think you'll start to see that type of data become more readily available through these portals. So I would almost argue that Paris has launched a model for kind of real-time design, trying to understand how people are using a public space and then redefining that space to meet those needs. Another core principle is being sensitive and making sure that you're not losing sight of the complexity of the human experience. So, again, this goes to kind of what type of data you're using, and not losing sight of the fact that you may not get the complete picture from the data. So it's really important to go out and seek as many potential resources, and not forget to connect with the community itself. Data is by no means a panacea, but certainly can help you get there a lot faster. And so I think it's striking a careful balance in your practice to ensure that you don't lose sight of the kind of human experience. But there are really great tools. This is to help people analyze and understand how spaces are being used. Sasaki Associates, for example, have created 2 different tools called My Campus and My Building that allow them to collect real-time information about where and how people are using a space, and then also get feedback about what people least like about a building. So this is good for kind of planning for future projects. It's also a really interesting way to kind of go back and reflect on how a project functioned and how it was received by the people that we designed for. And then this is a tool that actually evolved out of a hackathon. So this open data movement has catalyzed a new way of engaging through what's called a civic hackathon, and it brings together stakeholders from across the community. It brings the data scientists and the techies, but it also brings community activists and designers such as yourselves to the table to address major issues by looking at these open data portals. And a team came together in the city of Kansas City, Missouri, where I previously served as Chief Innovation Officer, and wanted to kind of understand what the impact that development had on a broader scale. So going beyond just the site-specific requirements of LEED and other programs to think about the environmental qualities of a building, to really understand how a building might impact a district and neighborhood in the urban scale. And so these type of tools pull from all of these different data sets and allow for kind of an iterative process by allowing people to test a variety of scenarios and understand what the potential impact of a design might be on the urban environment and various policy goals. And I think this is an image from an installation 10 years following Hurricane Katrina, but I think when I did some work in New Orleans post-Katrina, one of the things that was really important was, as we were doing a lot of data collection and actively working with the city and the federal government to help provide a lot of this data as inputs into their system, I wanted to highlight the importance of the potential consequences of your assumptions. So even if you can back up your assumptions with data, really having to ask yourself, are you seeing the complete picture? And there will always remain social channels and community connections that don't appear in the data. And so I think it's really important to remember how bringing together the neighborhood fabric is essential and a key consideration when you think about the integration of data into your design process. Another core principle, I think, of data by design is thinking about how to track changes over time and explore new patterns and dig deeper than what you might think and what you might be assuming. And I think that's something that's I think that designers are built to do this. We are constantly asking questions of ourselves and of the program and of our outcomes. But I think something that is really resonating now is that we have increased capabilities to do this. In the city of Kansas City, Missouri, where I helped broker a public-private partnership to bring smart city infrastructure to a streetcar starter line, we wanted to create a mechanism to connect people to these changes that were occurring, not just the new mode of transportation, but the experience of having a smarter, more responsive city, and how people might be actively engaged in providing information into that system, and how they may be benefiting from it, and how can we monitor and respond more directly to those needs. And I don't think that's much different than any type of design that you might come up with, in that we are designing for someone, for a community, for a neighborhood, and certainly want to know and be able to evaluate over time kind of how that has been impactful. And I think it's really exciting to see cities embracing and providing a platform for sharing that information. And so you can be just as engaged in terms of consuming this data that is available on the open data portals across the country, but also providing data into those portals. And I think that's a really significant opportunity of the design community, and I encourage you all to look into where and how you might be able to participate actively in this. I put this project in because I think it's a really interesting example of how using data to assess needs and evaluate outcomes is really becoming very critical. So this is a net zero school that was built in New York City, and it has, it basically generates as much energy on site as it uses on an annual basis, and has some really kind of cool little tricks in it. But one thing I thought was most exciting was that it engages the students directly in the outcomes of the project. So here you see these little kids are pedaling bikes and generating energy, so they're plugged into the wall, so they're actually providing energy out. And then on the wall there you see a monitor so that they can see what they're contributing as part of the sustainability lab. So it's really taking this kind of core value for sustainability and bringing it all the way through the program, and then creating this feedback loop that enables the students and teachers and users of this building to actively participate and provide feedback into how the building operates. I think that's a really promising future for our building industry. Another core principle is to tell a story. So deciding kind of what those categories of data are that help you make sense of the information, and then craft a story to build something that people can relate to and can help be part of the experience. In this case, this is just a built object, but uses a lot of technology. We understand that 90% of the urban population is breathing polluted air around the world, and that culminates in about 8 million deaths annually. This is a simple solution that allows for cooling in a 5-meter radius around this object. It provides biodiversity in a space that was heavily, lots of hard surfaces and concrete, but it also has the equivalent of 275 trees in terms of its impact on cleaning the air around it. And these are small little interventions that can have a significant impact. And by providing kind of a plug into this network of the city itself as a generator of data, we have a lot of power as designers to influence significant change with very small moments in time. This is the early idea behind Times Square. This is just a rendering, and if you have been watching what was happening, they basically flipped the ratio of the allocation of space between the vehicle and humans from 90 to 10% to 10 to 90%. So really powerful that all of a sudden people become the priority in this public open space. And overall, the city has reported about a 40% decrease in vehicle-caused pollutants since the plazas have been put in place across the city. And here's an example of Herald Square that is completely activated. And really, it took a look at what is the information behind this? What is the data behind this that can help understand how these spaces might be used, why they might be of value, understanding the land use around a plaza such as this, understanding the traffic flows and how it might be impacted by this type of intervention, but also being able to look down the road at the consequences of this intervention and understand that there's been a significant economic boost for the local shops around this area, that it becomes a destination for people in new ways and attracts tourism and extra spending, but also creates new employment and greater economic opportunity for the city as a whole. And finally, I think the most critical principle of integrating data into your design process is really thinking about how you integrate this into your office or your organization or your team, and defining those basics together. So making sure that everyone's coming along for the ride and understands how data will be of value to your process. And that can be a challenge. It's definitely requires a culture change, and I think we're seeing it in City Hall. I think we're seeing it at the federal government. But just as a reminder, this is a very nascent stage for open data, and your involvement as designers and consumers of this data will help drive this very important movement forward. And so I think, just thinking about that collaboration, we are ultimately designing for people. So, you can collect this data, add real-time data, look at how people are using this space, and make sure that you're best meeting the needs of the people that are using the designs that you've developed. It's also about experimentation, and working with a team collaboratively can kind of really open up a lot of possibilities, and while saving you time and potentially money. So instead of investing, limited resources on, paying for GIS layers from the city, or wasting time waiting for a city staffer to provide you with background information on a neighborhood, it is all now available at your fingertips, which really does make it something quite remarkable. And those of us who work around the clock, it's very much appreciated that you're no longer on the schedule of City Hall, that you are able to access this information and then test and try and iterate more quickly as a result of that. And then I think ultimately the goal is to improve policy implementation. So by you consuming this data and understanding what's out there and how it might be impactful in the design process, you are working towards helping cities improve their planning and delivery of services to communities. And I think that's something that's really important. I think ultimately open data is about creating transparency, and by making more data publicly available, cities and governments are able to make it easier for designers and planners to get this critical information, but also you become a better advocate for the type of information that you need. So if you're missing something, if you really want to know what's going on, but you can't seem to find that type of information, you're now empowered through this dialogue with the city to ask for that data. And maybe you will even be inspired to attend a potential hackathon. I know the National Day of Civic Hacking is coming up very soon. These are opportunities for you to learn and see how others are using the data, and certainly provides a really powerful resource at your fingertips to be integrated into your approach. And with that, I'll turn it back to Garrett.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Ashley. And I love hearing the fact that both of you have done this because it's a focus on people, and kind of taken both of your leadership charges in your roles currently because you want to make this information more accessible to people and put the focus of practitioners on people and needs. Always awesome to hear. We have a couple questions, but kind of the first question that I want to ask is, as speaking to an audience of mostly designers, what skill sets do you think people should really focus on, and what are the first steps in kind of jumping into this world that people should take? I know, Ashley, you said just kind of show up to some events with maybe other technologists, but what other kind of first steps would you recommend people taking? Like you also said, Ashley, you can contribute data to these portals. So just kind of want to hear from your perspective on, both on the local government side, how you would most appreciate people, wanting to engage in this work.
I'll take a crack at it. So I think first of all, designers are lending a really important voice to the open data movement because of their ability to visualize and create very powerful presentations of information. I think that's something, well, San Francisco has a great example, but if you look at some of the other data portals around the country, cities are still working towards trying to find an effective way of communicating that information in a way that brings meaning to it. So I think that's something that inherently this community can bring credible assets to this discourse, which is really essential. But I think the first step is really just exploring what's available to you in the places where you're working. I think you'd be almost overwhelmed by the availability of information and data as in its current form. And so by just building that awareness and keeping your eyes out for kind of what is most essential to your process will be really essential. And I think cities have made great strides, but there's more work to be done, and you understanding where those gaps are will help the city as well with prioritization of opening up that type of data.
Yeah, I'd add, I think for anyone out there, and this is a process I take, really looking deeply at the tools and the workflows and things that you already do, and what our new tools actually just showed a set of sort of approaches and tools. What are the tools that are being used? What are the digital tools? Get familiar with them, test them. What's great is a lot of them they're either free, open source, or they have a free version. So it's really easy to play. So I would, get out there, dive in, dig in. You can grab data off the shelf, so to speak. Even without a specific purpose in mind, I think it's really useful to go through that activity of understanding and building awareness for those things. And that's sort of individual capacity building. And then wherever you are, if there are those groups that meet regularly, whether that's an open data or open architecture collaborative or a code for X, whatever code, whatever city you're in, or open X, so there's all sorts of organizations out there that that have meetups that meet regularly. So find those communities of practice, or if they don't exist, create one. And I think there's a lot of energy here, and I think you'll bring folks along with you. So whether you're joining a new group or creating something new, I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Great, thank you, Jason. And actually, I really appreciate that you showed an example from outside of the States. Kind of how Paris is also kind of leading the way in connecting both the digital platform with the physical place of providing kiosks and doing engagement in that way. And I think, for people and members in our network that are outside of the States, is you can kind of advocate for this work as well and point to other examples. And we're more than happy to kind of share success stories with you, so that hopefully in your countries you can start having these, and a lot of other countries already do. I know a lot of best practices in the States also came from the UK, so they're kind of, it's a global movement, and there are organizations around the world. But just to echo Jason's point of matching with similar mission-driven organizations where you're at, an example of that is our chapter in San Francisco. Our chapter director met with the local Code for San Francisco group on a kind of mapping initiative to tag all of the privately owned public spaces in the city. So, just trying to figure out how to map all of that. One last question I have, which is a bit more technical from our audience, is have you all ever seen a more dynamic integration of open data and zoning and code policies into drafting technology? So it's kind of similar if you know about Google Flux, a program that I think was unfortunately recently shelved, but kind of making a model where designers could design buildings and kind of in real time understand the implications of what the code is, so that it's not about spending so much time and kind of legacy knowledge on those efforts. Just wanted to know if y'all have known something like that.
Well, I think the Planet Impact is brand new, so that is an attempt to kind of get there. I think by creating a platform where you could drop a SketchUp model into it, and it's fairly easy to evaluate a variety of scenarios. So there are several tools out there. They're not all free, because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to create a market in this space. So that's something just to be mindful of.
Yeah, this is actually something that when I was at Place Matters, we used a tool. Again, there aren't a lot of free ones that I know of, but Community Viz, which is a very sort of powerful. It's less about in the drafting workflows and more about scenario planning, so more at a GIS level, landscape level maybe. Although it can zoom down, and that's an extension for ArcGIS. So you already have to be in the ArcGIS sort of user and a group, and then you can add this extension. This has been a holy grail. A lot of people. There's some new stuff. I think coming soon. People are experimenting with technologies, WebGL, if that's familiar with you. Essentially 3D in the browser. Which is enabling and empowering a lot more use of those kinds of approaches, but it's all very nascent. So I would keep your eyes open. Urban Sim is a good group to keep an eye on. Paul Waddell's group out of Berkeley has been working on a number of tools that will, I think, start to go in that general direction. And there's probably many, many others that I don't even know of right now.
Great, thank you, Jason and Ashley. And just to reiterate this, it's a very new field and kind of burgeoning opportunities, and there's plenty of numbers on the opportunity of really putting open data out there and in the marketplace that can jump off of it. But I will keep in contact with Jason and Ashley to kind of make some of those resources available and provide the links so people can really start digging in and using this as a way of validating kind of the work that you're doing in the communities you're doing them in, and hopefully use it to inform the work that you're doing. So with that, we're at 10 o'clock, so I just want to thank Ashley and Jason very much for this incredibly deep and informative conversation about open data, city data, and how you might be able to use it. So with that, we'll do a follow-up and make sure you have the resources that they spoke about so that you can start visualizing based on your municipality's data. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.